I hope you're a week in franchising. There's been lots of fantastic things going on this week. I know that a few people are over across the pond in America at the IFA convention. I've seen some lovely photos of automatic cars, things like that. So it's all good stuff. So I hope everyone's having a good time there. My lovely friends have launched a podcast and I'm going to promote it. So look at me. So Kevin, Tim and Natalia have launched a franchise podcast. So you guys all check that out as well because they're lovely. So look, I always start with the same thing by introducing the show and the premise behind it and why we've come up with this show. So the franchise show is, as you can imagine, about franchising, but it is also a little bit more than that. It's if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a franchisee, or if you're a franchisor, it's here to serve a community, and it's designed to be a safe space for discussion and hopefully to have some thought-provoking discussion and debate. And it's, when I say a safe space, it's not a space that we sell in, it's a space that we have discussions in, and we have some amazingly enjoyable discussions. It's audience driven always. We're one community here, so we always recognize everybody's here, and it's driven by the comments that come in, because that's what we're going to talk about and that's the direction it goes. So what do we do each week? Each week we take a different topic, and we have a lovely guest. And today's topic is a good one. Today's topic is franchise regrets. And of course, we're going to put a spin on that and try and find out ways that you don't have so many regrets and you make some good decisions. But I'm really looking forward to hearing your stories of things that went well and perhaps didn't go quite as well. And as I say, when we have a lovely topic, we have a lovely guest. And today is no exception to that rule. So I'd like to introduce you all to the wonderful Nikki Senior. I've known Nikki for a little bit on here. Nikki is a franchising and recruitment expert and has been a franchisor as well. So before we get to the lovely audience, I'm now going to hand it over to the lovely Nikki and make a little bit of an introduction and a follow-up on what I've just said.
Thank you. I hope I can live up to that lovely introduction there. So yeah, for those who don't know me, I founded the Hey Baby 4D franchise, which is a private ultrasound franchise in the pregnancy space. So I created that business in 2018, ran that until the middle of last year when I sold it, and basically decided that I wanted to go into more of like the coaching and supportive, a role that kind of supported the franchise industry instead of being a franchisor.
Great. Well, that's a lovely and concise introduction. That's fantastic. What I'm going to do is, before we get any deeper into the chat, I'd like to recognize everybody that's joined us first thing today. So we're going to start. Oh, look, there you go. I got rid of it. Let's put it back on. Technical issues. I'd like to.
I'm at my friend's house and the light's just gone off.
All right. That's all right. You see, look, that proves that it's live. Love that.
Well, yeah.
It went quite ghost-like there.
It did, yeah. I'll just message her and see if she can turn it on, because I don't know where the switch is.
It's all good. It's all good. I'll turn the lights off here if that helps.
Yeah, we can just have like a nighttime.
Well, look, let me introduce a few people here. We've got the lovely Mara from Italy. Fantastic to have you here. We've got Kevin Ayres, expert on all things video production. Fantastic to have Kevin here. We've got the wonderful Penny Hopkinson, and I am going to show you her lovely book, and we are going to get that reversed so that looks the right way around one day. So Penny is a fantastic expert on franchise manuals and knowledge sharing, and we're going to get a lot more into that as the weeks continue. We have the amazing, the wonderful, the very wise Simon Wise. I hope you like what I did there, Simon. And Simon is an expert on franchise recruitment. So there's a little bit of an overlap on our guest today with the recruitment side of things. He runs a company called FranRec. He's a very good friend of mine, and you must all check out what Simon does if you need any help on recruitment. We've got Robert here. Robert is becoming a regular contributor. And actually, look, he's saying he's called Bob. So let's call him Bob now. Great to have you here, Bob. We have Natalia here. Look, that's two of the trio of podcasters that are here. So that's great to have you here, Natalia. Looking forward to your thoughts and any regrets you might have had. And we have Julie Waite. Fantastic to have you here. I know this is second or third time you've joined us, so looking forward to hearing what regrets you had, how you overcame them, and how you turned them into lovely positive things. We've got the lovely Malcolm here. I had a call with Malcolm yesterday. I think that's right. Lovely chap, partner-wise, and great to have you here. We've got Jitin here. Jitin is going to be a guest in 2 weeks' time. We're going to be discussing the youngest franchisee. So that's going to be quite an exciting episode. He was a franchisee, age 22, and has been a franchisor as well. So that's really good. And lastly, let's just say, there you go. The third of the Musketeers is swanning about in Phoenix, apparently, in self-driving cars and all those sorts of shenanigans. So there we go. So that's recognizing everyone that is here today. Perhaps we can start, Nikki, with maybe giving an example of something over the years that you've changed your mind about, or perhaps regretted in your career in franchising or helping out franchisors or franchisees.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. I'm one of those annoying people who lives my life with no regrets. So when I was thinking about what to talk about today, I was thinking he's going to ask me what I regret from, franchising, and I'm going to need to have an answer. So
you don't need an answer. You can just say that's a stupid question. Let's move on.
Yeah, I've got nothing to say. No, so I was thinking, what would I do differently if I was to set up a different franchise now? Because, I always think, every problem we've ever had teaches us something, right? And that's why I don't regret things. But if I was to set a new franchise up now, how would I do things differently? I think one of the first things is I went into franchising quite naively. I didn't know anybody else in franchising. I didn't have, the franchise industry is so incredibly supportive, and everybody I've ever met has always been, helpful, willing to share some insights, some advice. I don't think I've ever met a nasty or, unhelpful franchisor. And that community is something that really supported me and helped me when I was having a rough time. So for me, I think one of the first things I would do if I was to have my time again, or if I was to do it different, if I was to do it again, would be to create that community and tap into the resources that I now know are there. But from an actual being a franchisor perspective, I really wanted to, I saw a franchise as these, I guess a militant kind of industry. I thought, you have to have a table from this shop. It's got to be in this color, has to be 2 inches away from this wall. And, it's very controlling. And I really didn't want to be that kind of franchisor. I wanted to give people, the opportunity to put their style on things, to really kind of give people ownership, whilst also giving them a brand that they could rely on. And I later realized that those two things don't really go hand in hand, because not everybody has the same standards as you. So I guess probably about 2 years into my franchise, suddenly I was like, no, you need to do things this way. And I think that probably created a bit of friction, certainly with the earlier crowd who had come in on the basis of, it's your business, we're here to guide you. And I genuinely had that intention. But particularly in the medical industry, you don't have the opportunity to have different sets of standards across the board. And so, yeah, I think that there is a good reason why the successful franchisors are a bit more militant and a bit more strict and rigid. And yeah, so I think if I was to do it again, that'd be the first thing I would consider.
Oh, that's great. I think one of the things that you said there that resonated with me is the community within franchising that we have. I mean, this show and the community around this show is a great example of amazing people who support one another and share things together, even if those people perhaps are considered to be competition. Even if you're a franchisor in a space. I mean, I'm going to name drop Amrit here from Wolfinch, because Amrit is a chap who always supports his competition. He's going to be on the show. The topic is going to be franchise competition. But you're really right about that we have a supportive community. And I think you're right to reach out to that community rather than being insular. Is a great way. If you were thinking of franchising your business, it's a great beginning to reach out to experts who have done it, because what is franchising? You're wanting to use a proven model. You're looking at buying some time and buying that advantage. Well, use the same principles when you're looking at franchising your business by looking at other things around. Let's just have a little look. We've got a couple of other people here before we move on. We've got Jeff from Cape Coral, Florida. Jeff's a lovely chap. And he's heavily involved in franchising a property business at the moment. So great to have you here. We've got a comment here from the lovely Simon. And Simon's put, Nikki, what professional advice did you take before starting your franchise? That's a great question. I mean, it sounded like that perhaps one of your regrets that you didn't reach out for some of those things. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't really, I researched, obviously, and I had a mentor, but the mentor wasn't from franchising. So I think, from somebody who's never had exposure to the industry, and, I imagine Simon sat there now thinking, God, how naive, and, quite rightly so. But when you're not from the franchising industry, I think it's really difficult to really comprehend the unique setup of a franchise, like the dynamics of a franchise, because and we talk about this a lot, and I'm sure you've spoken about this with many guests, is that a franchise is not your business completely. Like it's you're essentially sharing a business with people. They can have their own business, but they're essentially renting it from you for a while, but there'll be things they want to have control over, and generally people who want businesses of their own do that because they want to have some be the master of their own destiny, essentially. But they need the model in order to, perhaps move into that industry, or, there's something they don't know about setting up a business, and they want that support and that guidance. And then, we all know, don't we, that you get to a certain time, once that level of support and guidance has been given and they feel they understand what they're doing, it's, there's like almost a breakaway of, well, I don't need you now. So, why am I now in a franchise and paying you this money, because I know what I'm doing now. So, it's such a unique dynamic. And I think it's really important that people coming into franchising really start to kind of understand that, because it's, there's a lot of conflicting interests, I think, within that dynamic.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I completely agree. And I think that there are, when you said there that you wrote, you had a mentor, but they weren't necessarily a specialist in franchising. And I don't think it's naive at all. I think when you're an entrepreneur and you're looking at the basic principles of franchising as a growth model, it's new to you, because there are other organic ways to grow a business, and franchising is one of those. So, there's lots of deep delves that you can go into all areas of franchising. But when you're looking at it in basic terms as an entrepreneur looking to grow the business, then I think it's important to understand and listen to the story that you tell here, because it can help somebody who's looking to do it and do it a different way. reach out to the communities and the wonderful people here. Let's have a quick look at a few other comments. Look at that. That's covered up my face. Hold on a minute. I might have to get rid of that one, but it's great to have. That's a new person, Ali. Good to have you here. Sufficient training and knowledge, engaging with the community. Yeah. I think knowledge, is key to anything. Seeking expert advice. We talk quite a bit about whether it's legal or whether it's finance aspects of it or ops sides. All of those have professionals that you can reach out to and get a good balanced piece of advice. So I like that. Let's have a look at this one from Kevin. Kevin's put, it's a bit like teachers who go in too soft. You can't get it back after that. If you start strict, set the standards, then some franchisees buy the right to get some slack. What do you think about that? Do you think start strict and give a bit of leeway? If you were doing it again, would you do it that way? Or because it's really interesting, you're saying about how controlling the sort of the franchise model is, and how it also appeals to entrepreneurs. But I think that Kevin makes a great point here. What do you think?
Yeah, completely. I think in terms of people being able to buy the right to get some slack, I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because you can easily then end up with some franchisees who you're giving more slack to, and then some who you're not. I had people who came in and negotiated something slightly different for them because that's what worked for them. And in my bid to try and be, nice and giving and relaxed about things, I agreed those things for those people. But, 2-3 years down the line, when they're having conversations with other franchisees, it would be, well, we feel that we've been treated differently. So I don't know. I do think you need to start strict. I think for me, I created very close personal relationships with some of my franchisees. I was like really good friends with a couple of them. I was going to invite them to my wedding. And when you have issues, as you do in any business, that can put quite a strain on you personally. Like for me, that took a huge toll on me personally when, those people fell out with me, essentially, because I'd lost some really good friends and some people who I really trusted. So I think for me, it's more about like not giving too much of yourself into the business from a personal level, and just maintaining those professional boundaries. And, when we're bringing people into our business and, you speak to these people more than you speak to your parents and vice versa when they're in that setup phase, particularly if there's quite a high barrier to entry and there's a lot of training that needs to be done. We've worked with our franchisees for a good 6 months, getting them through the regulatory approvals and all that stuff. So we spoke to them very regularly, and a lot of our training was like one-on-one, guidance on a real-time basis through the twists and turns. And so you became quite close with them.
Definitely. Yeah.
I think for me, like if I did it again, I wouldn't, I'd very much have those professional boundaries. I'd still be friendly and helpful, but it would not be, that personal element wouldn't be in there, I don't think.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Here, look, there's a great comment here from Simon. Let's put this one up here. Nikki, based on your experiences, what mindset do franchisors need to have to be successful? I mean, this is great because this is now spanning across into your current expertise. And I appreciate this is a difficult one to sort of put into a box as a mindset, but what would you say? Would you say that there's a particular mindset that a franchisor should have when they're going into this as a way of scaling their business?
That is, it's a massive question, if I'm honest, to try and answer. But I think like when I do coaching with people, and I'm not trying to plug that, just to try and put some context to it. When I'm doing coaching with people, we do a lot of looking at.
I don't like people when they plug stuff. Ooh.
Yeah, I'm not trying to do that. But we do a lot of looking at the way you think and the way you, like what your fundamental beliefs are, and how you see the world, how you see business, how you see yourself. That stuff, in my opinion, really needs working on, because when we are, whether you're a franchisor or a franchisee, an entrepreneur, wherever you are, if you are setting up a business, there are going to be parts of your belief system, parts of your biggest fears are going to come up and smack you in the face like a soggy fish when you're in that process. And you can start to really wobble. You can start to have like some real self-doubt. For me, I think I took things quite personally because I created these personal friendships with people. And so then when there was criticism, it very much felt like a personal attack. And there were occasions where it was definitely a personal attack. It was, very black and white. But that then really knocked my self-confidence and my confidence in what I was delivering as well. And it was only having like third-party suppliers coming in and saying, oh my God, what you give your franchisees is amazing, particularly for the money that you're charging. It was only when those people came in, like probably near the end, just before I sold the business, and said that to me, that it was like, it kind of built my confidence up a bit more and made me realize, actually I have done a lot, and we do provide a lot for what they're paying. But I think really just working on identifying your beliefs and anything that might kind of pull you back into fears is a really powerful way to push yourself forward and because if you've got that like strong foundation, you've got that resilience, you're going to be able to support people in the right way.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I mean, it's a big question, and mindset is something that I think we've had 2 or 3 episodes, and we'll probably have another 10 or 20 and probably never get to the bottom of it. But it's a really important thing, and there are experts out there that people can talk to try and get themselves into a better place in terms of the mindset. Let's pick another one here. We've got one. Oh no, we've done that one. Let's have a look at this. This is from Bob. Franchisors I have worked with regrets, also teachable moments. Yeah, I think any regret, and this is the whole point of this particular topic, but anything that goes wrong is a learning, isn't it? It's an opportunity to do something right. So I definitely think that a regret is a teachable moment. Also, I think as you're growing your business as an entrepreneur, and this may be pre-franchise scaling, that's when you're having quite a lot of your regrets, perhaps. And that's where you're having your learnings. And that's where you're developing a proven model. And that's where you're starting to get yourself into a place where it's a franchisable thing. Let's continue reading. Them signing on franchisees without meeting face to face. Oh my goodness, yes. I talk about this so much that when I work with a potential new franchisee, it's about getting to know that person, because you're going into business together. And I completely get what you mean about not making it too personal. But even so, it's a big commitment, both sides, and it's got to be right. Those mindsets perhaps have got to match. And if they don't, there can be some conflict. So I think, yes, I mean, not only have you got to meet someone face to face, but you've got to do that a fair few times, I think. Being signed, did this because they wanted to strike while the sale was hot and get the money quickly. Those inevitably ended badly. Yes, definitely. I think if you rush the process, it's never gonna end well. So take your time and get to know one another, I think, is the lesson there.
Can I just to comment on that, actually? So we did through COVID, we did sign a few people who obviously we couldn't meet in person, and actually they did work out quite well.
Okay.
But it was about building that relationship and getting to know them. And I think that comment there was very much around like trying to get the sale quickly. And my bottom line whenever I sent the contract to anybody was, look, there's no rush from us. That's fine. I think in the early days when I was probably a bit more naive to it, there was probably 1 or 2 where I was like, oh, we'll give you some money off if you sign by the end of the month, kind of thing. But that's that kind of early days. But by the time we were sort of a year or 2 in, it was very much, look, there's no rush from our side. We want you in the business. We think you've got the right skill set, but it's got to be right for you. So you come back to us. But certainly through COVID, there wasn't the option to meet people in person. No. So, we opened a number of locations and everything was done online. But they were people who had signed up when we could meet them, to be fair. We met them before COVID had hit.
Yeah, absolutely. And also there are things like this, this is such a fantastic example of how you can get to know a community, or get to know a number of people, or get to know each other through something that isn't necessarily face to face. The comments are coming up, and these wonderful people are here most weeks, and I get to know them, they get to know me. It's a good example of how perhaps a relationship can be built. Let's have a look at a few others here. Mara's put, a franchise is basically a very special relationship. Yeah, I think so. I think so as well. And a relationship, I think it was last week we were comparing a franchise relationship to a marriage, and that you should date first. But it's a relationship that needs working on. It's a relationship that you shouldn't rush into at the beginning. And I completely agree with that. We were speaking earlier about mindset. Do you think there needs to be an alignment in mindset? I know it's a big subject as to what the mindset is, but do you think two different mindsets can work well together?
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody's the same, are they? And I think if you, like, our franchise was very diverse in every possible way. But there are certain mindsets, I think, like very fixed mindsets can be quite difficult to challenge and difficult to deal with when you're, if you're trying to negotiate a change, for example, if you need to change direction of the business or update a policy that impacts everybody, if you've got somebody who's in a very fixed mindset kind of perspective, that might be a bit more challenging to kind of bring them along. I think mindset can be altered. It really, for me, one of the interesting things is, we do all these psychometric tests, don't we? And we have really good recruitment processes for franchisees. And for the most part, I think they really have their place and they do a really good job. But there is, even the franchisee doesn't know how they're going to react when they've put all their life savings in. They're committed to a 5 or 10 or even longer contract, year contract. And they're sitting there and they're not quite at the point where the money's coming in yet, or, they're not quite at the point where they're covering their overheads fully, and they've still got to pay their franchisor and all these other costs are still going out. And I think nobody fully can tell how they're going to behave or react or feel in that moment, because, and this was really where our conversation came from, wasn't it? About the whole regrets thing, because when you're in that moment and you've got this financial pressure and you've got this, all this, and you've told everyone you're going into this franchise and setting this business up, and you've quit your job, and, there's a huge amount of pressure there to be able to push forward and to be in the right mindset and to be able to find that faith from somewhere and keep pushing forward. And I think, for a franchisee, that's quite a challenging place to be. And that's where that support from the franchisor really needs to kind of come in.
Yeah, that sort of moves me on to a phrase that you've said before, which is the 3-month wobble.
Oh, I could talk about that all day.
I think it's time to talk about the 3-month wobble, because I think we'd all be intrigued to know your experience and why that became a turn of phrase for you, and if there's a particular vulnerable time for a relationship between a franchisor and a franchisee.
Yeah, well, you just answered it. That's it. I think. I think that's the one. So we found when people open the business, so for us, we had quite a long period of time between signing the agreement and actually opening the business. And, we had people who were in tears and all sorts within that process, because if you're going through CQC regulation, you have to have your clinic ready. And, in the medical industry, you have to have everything ready to go, be ready to receive customers and patients before the CQC will even think about coming out to register you, because they want to see the finished article and know that you're capable of delivering. So within that 6-month period, we would do the finding a location, all the usual stuff you would have with a bricks and mortar kind of location. But on top of that, they would be learning, yes, the business model, but as well, all the policies, regulations, and very few of our franchisees came from a medical background, because, that's why they were coming to the franchise. So, we were teaching them a hell of a lot about the medical side of things, safeguarding, all the health and safety. And then they would go through, we'd do all this preparation for the CQC. So they'd almost get to the point where the CQC sent their registration certificate and they're like, oh, thank God, it's over. The hard work's over. And I was like, oh no, my friend, the hard work is just beginning. Because that's when you've now got to go and get the customers. Yeah. And that's the putting yourself out there, being on social media, all that stuff that, where all our fears of rejection and not being good enough and all that stuff all come to the forefront. So by that point, these people have paid for, rent on premises. They've paid for an ultrasound scanner. They've paid for loads of stuff. They've hired their staff. They've had to do absolutely everything. And then they're opening. And then, their overheads are starting and they're relatively high, or they were relatively high in our industry. So then they've got franchise fees coming in and, all this stuff. So it was, I think at that point, that's when the pressure really started. And 3 months was usually the point at which you could see the green shoots coming. But it was making money, but it wouldn't necessarily always be covering the overheads. It usually did, but not always. And often I think when people come into a franchise, no matter how much preparation you give them, they're like, I'm going to be making money instantly. This is a proven model. And we obviously were very open with people and very clear that we couldn't guarantee any results. But I think there is almost an expectation sometimes that actually, this should start bringing me some money in pretty quickly. And as I say, it always did, but it, usually it covered the overheads, but there were occasions where, for whatever reason, they didn't quite cover the overheads in that first couple of months. So that 3 month kind of phase is like, oh my God, I've been doing this for half a year now, or 9 months, for our franchisees. I'm 9 months in. I've probably not been working, or I've only been working part-time. It was a big job, so they needed to be full-time at it. And it was very much like, I don't think I can do this. We had people, everybody had different problems at that point. So some would have, an issue with customer complaints. They couldn't find staff. Somebody else might have finance issues. Everybody would have their own unique issue at that point. But it almost seemed to just tip them over the edge of like, do you know what, I can't do this. But we got to the point where we would, when people were looking at signing up, we'd be like, right, when you open your clinic, 3 months in, you're going to have this meltdown and be like, I cannot do this. And that's fine. You just need to call us. We'll help you through it. It's all going to be fine.
I think it's really interesting because I think you're right. It's about setting that expectation as well, isn't it? And I think if new franchisors are aware of the possibility of something like that happening, when the pressures of the overheads are far outweighing the income coming in those early days, while the business is being established. I think it's you've hit the nail on the head by saying that it's about making sure that message is properly delivered to people. But like you say, even when it is, people still have their expectations. So let's have a quick look, because we've got lots of comments here, and I'm always like to make sure everybody is recognized. So let's see, go back up to the top here. We've got a comment here from Malcolm. What's the balance between having regrets, gaining learnings, and not trialing initiatives to grow your business? This is a good one, a really good one, actually, because when you said about when things go wrong and try and look on the positives and those sorts of things, but obviously when something does happen and you've got a regret, it's very easy to think, oh gosh, yeah, that didn't go very well, I'm not going to do that again, or become a bit insular in terms of trying new things. Do you think that's fair to say there?
I think it really depends on the situation. We would trial things, but we would ask for volunteers to trial things, so that we would, we'd have like a selection of clinics that would try something, and we'd monitor the results so that we could establish whether we were going to implement it or not. But I think that's a difficult question to answer, that one, because I'm the kind of person who I'm always trying to go, right, okay, we had a problem there, that didn't work. How do we make that better? How do we fix that? How do we move forward? It's not necessarily about closing down and not doing it again.
No, I think it depends on your mindset, perhaps, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It's about getting that mindset right. And I think most entrepreneurs have a positive failure attitude, because most entrepreneurs have failed many times, and that's their learnings. That's how they're moving forward. So I think hopefully it will be something that just helps hone a model and makes it all the better for those regrets, and turn those into positive learnings. But great comment, Malcolm. Thanks for that. Right, let's have a little look. We've got a comment here from Kevin. We don't have a place in our brain for video, so the emotional part of our brain can't tell the difference. I think that just goes back to something we were saying earlier on, and Kevin's an expert on video, so he would know all about that. Bob's put here, do you have an outside agency to do profiling questionnaires for potential franchisees to tell if there would be a good fit, psychological profiles? Have you had any experience of using these? These are certainly something that's become more popular to use, because I suppose a regret might be having the wrong franchisee on board. And do you think these are a valuable thing? Do you think they assist the process, or do you think it's all about two people getting to know one another to get that part of it right?
I mean, for me, I think as many checks as you can do, the better. I don't think any psychological profiling tool is going to give you exactly who that person's going to be and how they're going to behave, like we talked about when their biggest fears are facing them, or I was just thinking as well, actually, when we were talking, but just going back to those people who were feeling that the finances weren't quite reaching them yet, in that first few months. Again, a lot of the time that came down to perception, and the actual figures didn't always marry up with the perception of the individual, because they were in that like fear moment of, oh my God, I've put myself out there. But going back to the psychological profiles, I do think they have their place, absolutely. I had one franchisee who I think would have passed any of those profiling tools and would still have got through, and was still, just not the right person for me or for my business. And I think they would have absolutely passed any test you put in front of them with flying colours. We didn't use it to start with. We did start looking at one of those just before I sold the business, and I believe that's being implemented. But absolutely think that there is a place for that kind of tool.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, how does your experience going back being a recruiter, was that something that was very useful when you started your business? Because as a recruiter, you're used to asking intriguing questions of someone to get to to understand who they are. So I imagine that was really useful for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the reasons I felt that this would be a good industry for me to go into, because recruitment isn't just selling. I know most people who've dealt with recruiters will think that it's just people ringing up and just firing CVs over. But a good recruiter will always get to really understand the candidate, what they've done. So I'm quite good at getting down to the understanding what people have actually done in their jobs, where their capabilities lie. It's something I did for 10 years and thoroughly enjoyed. So absolutely. And I did tend to find as well, you would assume that going into a private ultrasound clinic or business, that a sonographer would be the right person to run one. But, different brain types and different ways of thinking. Sonographers are very detail oriented. They are incredibly intelligent human beings to be able to even, grasp any of the concepts of what goes on inside our bodies and be able to see that on this screen that to the rest of the world just looks like a big blob and a load of stuff going on. That there is an amazing skill set, and kudos to them for what they do, but it doesn't always lend itself from a personality perspective into running a business. And so I did tend to find when we were working with potential franchisees and establishing what their skill sets were, as I say, most of my franchisees didn't come from a medical background, because really the skill sets we needed were business skills.
Yeah, it's identifying what skill sets you need, and it seems maybe obvious that when you're in that trade that a sonographer is going to be ideal, but like you say, not necessarily the case. I remember actually talking to a sonographer who was looking at a coffee franchise. Actually, it was interesting because he was saying, and it's about understanding people, because he was saying, because I always ask people kind of what's their their thoughts, what's their dreams, how do they picture their day-to-day life doing what they're going to do, and he very vividly described it to me. And it was coming from a place of being stuck in a room scanning people's knees, I think, all day. But it was it's really interesting to just get to know people in that sense. There's a great comment here from Simon. Let's just put that up here. Did you employ a boots on the ground support for your franchisees when you were running your business? Were you sort of actively there supporting and helping them, or did you do it more remotely and rely perhaps on processes a bit more?
We did do more remotely, but we did have, like, on their day when they would first open, the web and tech person would go down there, and we'd have an operations business manager down there so that they could, help support with, making sure that everything was working properly on day one. But there was a lot of very, very heavy training beforehand to make sure people knew, how to do things on the day when it opened, essentially. But no, again, one of those things I did that I probably wouldn't do if I had another franchise was I went with a fixed fee. So it did really restrict us in terms of what I could actually do. I did have a head office team. They were incredible. They supported the franchisees very well. But, if I was going to be doing it again, I would go onto a percentage-based model so that I can grow with the network. And so I'd be able to invest more money into things like having somebody out in the field constantly. COVID also really did kind of change things quite a lot for us, because we were like all ready to be that kind of, more facing and being local in the clinics and going out and seeing people. And then COVID hit after we'd been open for, just under 2 years. So we'd only got a few clinics open by that point. So yeah, it kind of changed, I think, the way that the world works. And a lot of businesses are only just starting to come back to, being in person and doing things face to face again. So
yeah, I think you're right. And I think a lot of businesses had to sort of force a policy and a procedure to replace what perhaps used to be a boots on the ground type of operation. And of course, it turned out to be perhaps a more efficient or a lower cost exercise than the boots on the ground. And maybe that didn't come back as robustly as it should have done, because it's certainly an important thing, I think, to keep some level of boots on the ground support for people. But great point, Simon. Thank you again for that. Let's bring a comment up here from Bob. And Bob's put, I almost think franchisors need an emergency response plan for planning for worst case franchise issues, death, divorce, illness of owners, etc. Yeah, I think so. We're talking here today about franchise regrets, and regrets can quite often come from a lack of research, a lack of planning, and not having these things in place. I think COVID in a way helped people, because they put in these plans for these worst case things, which perhaps before that they wouldn't have thought about. I mean, did you have emergency response plans for various things within your franchise business when you had it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so we did, absolutely. We had to have policies for everything because we were in the medical industry again. So, contingency planning was part of it, but that was incredibly basic before COVID. Once COVID had hit, it was a lot more robust. And, you develop as you go, don't you? And just rewinding slightly. So because we were in the medical industry, again, we were regulated by the CQC, but every CQC inspector in every region had their own thing that was like their special thing that they would focus in on. So one would be really like adamant about or really honed in on like safeguarding. One might be health and safety. There was a huge lack of consistency across what they would ask you to do, which was brilliant for us from a growth perspective, because every time any of our franchisees were visited or registered or had an inspection, there'd always be something new that no other inspector in the last 5 years had said anything about or mentioned once. And they'd be like, you have to have this thing. This isn't good enough. And it'd be like, well, it's been good enough for 5 years across 20 locations. So, where's that come from? But it was brilliant because we literally just updated the policies every single time, added new things to it. And of course, kept ahead of guidance as well. But yeah, I think that's definitely grew for us, and we definitely did have that. But I think, you know, from what Rob's saying there as well, with I always used to say, you know, with a franchise, somebody opens a business, outside of what they're doing with the opening of the business, life doesn't stop. Just because you want to open a business, life isn't going to stop. You're still going to have births, marriages, you know, deaths. You're still going to have your husband leaving. You know, people have husbands leaving them. I had a franchisee who signed the agreement, next day did a positive pregnancy test. I was like, are you sure you're okay to carry on? Like, I will let you exit. It's no problem. You can have your money back. She was like, no, I'm doing this. You know, and we had, so, and I'm sure I'm singing to the choir here. I'm sure everybody in here has heard some incredible stories about what franchisees have actually gone through throughout the setting up process, the running of the business. You know, and it's obviously something that's covered in your franchise agreement from a death perspective. But yeah, people have lives. And again, that's why I've gone into the side of the business I'm going into now, because supporting people through that and helping them to maintain a balance between their, you know, their personal problems and their business problems, and trying to create something better for themselves is kind of where I want to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I agree. And if you can put these things in place, I mean, I had a franchisee talking about this, and it's about discussing these things as well. You know, exit strategies is another one of those things, you know, to talk about, you know, to talk about how you're going to exit it. Sometimes people don't talk about that, but you know, it's normally something that does have an end, have a natural end, and it's okay to talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to we are starting to draw towards an end. We normally like to keep this at about 50 minutes long, so I'm going to put up a couple more comments here before we draw things to a conclusion, and we'll have a little look at one here from Natalia. And Natalia's put, especially with expectations of income break even. This is one of the reasons, I think we're going back to the 3-month wobble and our conversation there. This is one of the reasons why it's so important that prospective franchisees do their own business plan.
Yeah.
Whilst the franchisor can provide a template, if the prospect is having to put the business plan, they should understand where they would break even and what that means. I love that, because I think sometimes franchisees, because they're buying into a franchise, think everything's going to be done and they've got a ready-made successful business. Yeah. And I think it's very key that they have to do their own business plan. They have to work hard at the business, but they're just getting a lot of things already done that they would have had to have done as well. What do you think about that comment?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So we had a cash flow spreadsheet where you could manipulate the data on one sheet, you know, to say how many days you'd be open, how many average scans per hour, all the other stats that were important. And people could go in and manipulate those, and it would automatically change the, you know, using the average scan value and the average upsells and what have you, it would automatically change things on the next sheet. And then we had a separate spreadsheet, which was for them to create their own forecast and to put their own plan in. And we give them the average figures over the first 12 months of the business, so they could see what the average across the group would be. And then they can obviously try and use that to work out how they would do things. And they'd be given, you know, all the information about, you know, what things impact it, basically, what are the key factors that would impact your ability to make that kind of money. And then we'd review it for them, and obviously they'd send that off for finance if needed as well. But yeah, 100% agree with that. It's a really important part of the process.
Brilliant. I do need to recognise Don Cohen, who's joined us here today. Don is an absolute legend. He's taught me all I know about LinkedIn Live. If you're looking to do a LinkedIn Live stream like this, then reach out to Don and he can help you do it just as I do it. Whatever you think of that. But let's just quickly put up something here from Simon. We are getting towards the end, but as ever, the comments are amazing. The community is amazing. We've clubbed together from a blank piece of paper to have what I think was an amazing conversation. So I want to say thank you to everyone. But we've got here understanding and appreciation of the franchise life cycle is very important for sure. And you have to deploy the right support to address these challenges. Again, I think that's going back to the 3-month wobble, I think is also referring to talking about exit strategies and what that life cycle looks all the way through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think franchise life cycles. I'm going to write that one down. That's the topic there, isn't it?
Yeah. There is a graphic as well. There is a visual, which I'm sure Simon has it. I'm sure he'll share it with you. But yeah, I'm happy to otherwise. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, look, I think we are drawing to the end. I think let's have a little look. We've got one more comment here. It's from a LinkedIn user. So let us know who you are so that I can recognize you. How would we expect a franchisor handle failed franchisees under their brand? Do we feel franchisors should also play a part in accountability for this? I think taking this back to franchise regrets, if you've got somebody who is failing, I think you've got to understand why first.
Yeah.
And it might not necessarily have been because something that you made a wrong decision or they did, but it could well be that there's a lack of support. How would you say, going back on your experience, if you had another franchise business and you had somebody who perhaps wasn't doing as well as the others, or not perhaps following things as they should, how do you stop that apple affecting the others effectively?
Yeah, I think that's where a really good agreement and a really good manual comes into play, because we only had I had a couple of people probably early days who failed for varying personal reasons that were happening, and I just released them from the agreement. It didn't seem fair when they were having such a tough time anyway to kind of hold them to the agreement and make them stay. They didn't have the money to pay, and they didn't have the mental capacity to kind of keep pushing through. So I think when you've got really severe things happening in your personal life, it's not worth it. We had one person who was very dishonest with us and with the CQC. That was very difficult because they tried to say our policies weren't up to scratch and things like that, but we had a number of clinics open using the same policies. They were all fine. That was something it was quite a difficult situation, because it was very the blame was very much on us, but it was like, well, you've not been honest. So that's a bit of a challenge. Yeah. We did have one franchisee who, absolutely adorable people, love them to pieces. They just couldn't quite get their minds in the right place. And that's, again, one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing. But they just couldn't quite grasp doing the things they needed to do in order to make the business work. I think if you have a really good business model that is clearly working and it's proven, generally there will be something that's just not quite clicking within that specific location, in my experience anyway. And I very much found that I found it quite frustrating, because you're trying to drag people over the finish line, kicking and screaming sometimes, and they're just not quite ready to come with you. And that was difficult. So I think, we've talked about it being a relationship, being open, talking about exit strategies. I think it's down to the franchisor to say, look, I don't think this is working, and I think perhaps it's time for you to consider whether this is the right thing for you or not, and start looking at whether that franchisee can be released. Because generally, if one person in a relationship isn't happy, the other one isn't either. So
no, I think you're right. And I like what you said about being open and honest. And sometimes it means saying, well, look, this isn't working out. It's time for it to be concluded. But I think each challenge, you've got to look at it individually and help people and give them that individual support on that journey. Even though people are following the same model, they need an individual set of support that perhaps is going to help them. Well, look, we are now at a conclusion, and I don't like to keep people too long. Before we finish up, though, Nikki, if you could let people know very briefly what you do right now and where people can get hold of you.
So I help franchisors and their franchisees to sort of navigate the mental and emotional challenges of business ownership. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at my website, which is nikkisenior.co.uk. They're the two best places. And and I also support with talks at conferences and training and coaching.
Perfect. Very concise and beautifully done. Well, look, that is it. I'd first of all like to say again, thank you for everyone who has been here today. It's as ever been amazing. You've been wonderful. You've driven the conversation. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. And I'd like to thank you as well, Nikki, for your time today. And for sharing your stories and experiences with everybody here. It's been fantastic. So until next week, we will be on next week, same time, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 Eastern time. And next week we have Chad Harrison, and the topic is new to franchising. So we're just going to approach things when you don't quite know about franchising and you're looking at perhaps a way of expanding your business. And we're going to have a good chat about that. So I really look forward to that one. But look, again, thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful. And we will see you next week. Take care.